Ever seen one of these? This is a cookie's consent message. So you're probably wondering why these consent messages exist and why your computer wants baked goods. It all ties back to the rich history of cookies, their role in our daily browsing, and the impact they've had on internet privacy. So, what exactly are cookies? What's their purpose? Who created them and why? And most importantly, are cookies as invasive to our privacy as they seem? Let's start with the basics. What exactly are cookies? I had to get actual cookies since we're talking about cookies, but these are a different kind. And the best way to explain internet cookies is through an analogy. So imagine you're a network man, or maybe a job fair, and when you enter these events, you're given a name tag. And in the name tag, you put your name, maybe what job you do, what grade you're in, and that name tag helps you helps people remember who you are. So as you're walking around, they say, "Hey, that's the guy. That's his name. That's what job he does." And internet cookies are sort of the same thing, where there's a small little packet of data, just like your name tag, and it helps websites remember who you are, and it makes the internet pretty efficient and pretty easy to use. So when you enter a website, that website often prompts you, "Hey, do you want cookies?" And not only that, it also asks you what type of cookies you want, and there's various types of cookies, and we'll get to that later on. So what do these cookies do? So when you press yes to that cookies message, that website sends over a little packet of data to your computer, and your computer stores that little packet of data onto its machine, and more specifically in the browser. And those cookies help websites and you in general remember who you are. So say you have a certain preference, like you like to use this website in dark mode, cookies help with that. Or say you have a login, and with session IDs, cookies help with that, so you don't have to keep logging in as you navigate through that same website. Another thing would be a shopping cart. You don't have to keep putting the same items in your shopping cart because cookies help store that information. And then there's other types of cookies. There's tracking cookies, and that's where the concerns about privacy and how much information is too much for a website and the internet in general to have about you. So I think doing an exercise about the history of cookies is a good thing to do to help explain why the concern about privacy is a thing for cookies. So let's talk about the history of cookies. History of the cookie. Let's give some context. It's 1994, Bill Clinton's president, Cold War is basically over, Bosnian War is going on, and internet, it's in its infancy. And one of the issues they got into with the internet at the time was memory. There was no way of just retaining memory with the internet. And that's where cookies came into play. So cookies started out with this guy at Netscape. His name was Lou Montulli, and he was dealing with a client, MCI, Telecommunications, which went bankrupt, I think, in the early 2000s because of accounting scandal, just like Enron. And they were requesting him, Lou, to a way of retaining session IDs instead of it being on their servers, on the client, so the end user. And that's what cookies basically do, is they're stored on the end user's browser. So in late 1994, it actually got incorporated into Netscape Mosaic in a beta version. And one of the first use cases for cookies was for checking for recurrent visitors onto Netscape's website. And in 1995, it came out Internet Explorer 2. And in 1996 is where the privacy concerns of internet cookies came into, or they were serviced. So there was a publisher in the UK called Financial Times, and they really expressed the privacy concerns about internet cookies. So at the time, internet cookies, nowadays you have to give consent, but at the time there wasn't no consent, it was implied consent. The user didn't even know that cookies were even present at their website, at any website they visit. So there was a group called IETF, Internet Engineering Task Force, which tried to sort of regulate cookies on their own, and that failed because the browsers they just ignored those regulations or suggestions they gave about the privacy concerns of cookies, and browsers just moved on, and the use of cookies exploded because of the advantage that cookies offer, which is storing or tracking user information basically. And the privacy concerns peaked in the 2000s, and with the history out of the way, we now can talk about what exactly were the privacy concerns of cookies. So I mentioned earlier in the video that I was going to talk about the different types of cookies. Cookies can be split into two main categories, which boil down to how long the cookie can exist on the client's browser. The first is a session cookie, which is passed on to the server to the client and is not stored on the client's browser. This type of cookie is automatically deleted when the user, say they leave the website, they close the browser, or they close the tab where the session cookie originated from. A good use case scenario for these type of session cookies is, say, for example, you're online banking and the bank or the website doesn't want you to remain logged in after you close the website, you close the browser, just for security purposes. Cookie number 2 is the one where the privacy concerns come into play. Cookie number 2 is called the persistent cookie. These are also known as tracking cookies, which is a term we're probably more familiar with. And persistent cookies remain existent on the client's browser even after they close the tab, they log off, they close the browser, or they leave the website. So persistent cookies give the power of intelligently gathering user data as they continue to use the website, because it's persistently stores on the client's browser. So as they navigate through the website, more and more information is gathered. I think the best way to showcase the power of persistent or tracking cookies is to go through an example scenario. So let's say you navigate to a website, say an e-commerce website called FBay, eBay, and you're a new visitor to the website. And from here, you get a prompt requesting consent of cookies, and just like many contracts in real life, let's just say you blindly agree. So what happens here is then that response is then sent back to the server, and that same server then assigns you a unique ID, which is sent back to you, your browser. And now here is where the important dynamic has occurred. That server now has a unique ID that ties back to you, to your browser, and not only since you agreed to have cookies, so what happens here is every time you navigate to a new page on that same website, you send that same cookie with that same unique ID. So from here on out, that server or that e-commerce website has the ability to track you on collecting various things like what web pages you visited, for how long, what products you're interested in, what products you've bought, what products you have in your shopping cart. So what's impactful about this? I mean, this is just a website collecting random, seemingly harmless data, right? You're just collecting, oh, I like to buy hot dogs. I don't know how you be able to ship hot dogs, but anyways, what you don't know is that FBay or this e-commerce website likes to get as many sources of income as possible. So what happens is they allow various different advertisers to display ads on their website. So these are third-party cookies. So what happens here is this website has all this data about you, and they can send that data over to those advertisers. So the power comes into play is if that same advertiser has deals with other websites. So what happens there is it starts to get creepy, where you go to this other website that's not even related to e-commerce, and they start showing those ads that are things you looked at from that e-commerce website. And that's what was happening with 2000s. They were littered with these third-party tracking cookies, and it was sort of creepy. Come check this out. So, let me move my camera. Why did I? So third-party cookies took a big hit with privacy updates and regulation, but I think this will have a stronger impact on third-party cookies and cookies in general. So let me show you. Okay, let me demonstrate. So say you're searching for something as simple as, let me see, I don't know why this came up in my mind, but what is chana masala, which is an Indian dish. Chickpeas and stuff, but we'll see what Google says. And look at that. The first thing you see in the top is, not ads, not like the whole Google overview. What you see by default is the AI overview thing, and it tells you, what it is. It's North Indian. It even tells you a video, and it shows you key characteristics, how it's made. It even tells you that's like a recipe right there. And there's references. And the other thing is, we'll talk about this later, but there's the dive deeper in AI mode, and when you click that, this is basically the same thing as what, ChatGPT gives, which is like a whole description, an AI description of what chana masala is. So the reason why I brought up AI overview, the whole Google AI overview thing, is how it impacts cookies. So if you remember cookies, the way they work is you go on a website, and then that website will then install cookies onto your browser, your machine, if you like, of course. So, cookies, third-party cookies, that's how they work. But with AI overview, if you noticed, say the user is searching for something simple as what is chana masala, they will put it in Google search, and the first thing they see is basically the answer, and then obviously reference links. But if the user is getting the answer directly from the AI overview, chances are they're not going to click on those reference links, and what's going to happen to you if you're a website owner and cookies in general is those cookies aren't going to go into that user searching for that term. They're going to see the AI overview and their answers will be satisfied, and they won't progress beyond that. They probably won't click on the reference links, probably see the video, maybe look at that, but they won't go beyond that. So I think the big key takeaway from this AI overview thing, and how cookies have been targeted by privacy regulation and privacy stuff, cookies, tracking cookies, and the internet in general and how people interact with websites in general will fundamentally change. I think now what websites are going to have to do is make content that's more AI friendly, which is an unfortunate truth, because what will probably happen is users will most likely get their information from the AI overview, and there's browsers out there that are entirely AI based. They entirely feed you their curated view of whatever you're searching. Like Perplexity is a good example of that. No longer will it be just a list of links. It's probably going to be the whole AI overview, and there's the whole AI mode thing. So cookies, tracking cookies, and the way we as users will be using the internet will be fundamentally different than what we're used to.